In the oldest civilizations on Earth, stories about strange hybrid beings appear again and again. Creatures that were part human, part animal, part divine. Some protected kings. Some lived underwater. Some carried tablets of knowledge. And some guided humanity in moments when the world was still young and unstable. One of the most intriguing groups of ancient creatures appears in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. These beings were called Apkallu, and according to the oldest tablets we have, they were not simply monsters or symbols. They were described as wise beings who shaped the early stages of human progress. If you enjoy videos that explore ancient civilizations with clarity and structure, feel free to leave a like. It helps this content reach more people who are interested in topics like this. The Apkallu appear in Sumerian and Akkadian literature, often connected to the earliest kings of humanity. They are described as semi-divine beings, sometimes fully human in form, sometimes described with wings, sometimes portrayed with fish-like bodies. The variations depend on the period and the region, but their purpose remains consistent. They were messengers of knowledge. The Sumerians didn't view knowledge as something humans developed on their own. They saw it as something delivered, taught, by beings who existed before human society fully formed. This idea becomes clearer when we look at the Seven Sages, the most famous group of Apkallu. The earliest tablets list them by name: Wana, Uanejiga, Enmejiga, Enmegalama, Enmebuluga, Enlilda, and Uduabzu. Each one is linked to a different stage of early civilization. Some taught writing. Some taught agriculture. Some taught rituals, city planning, law, and craftsmanship. In Mesopotamian tradition, these beings came from the Abzu, the deep waters associated with Enki, the god of wisdom, magic, and the sciences. The imagery varies. Sometimes Apkallu appear as men wearing fish cloaks, sometimes as humanoid figures with eagle heads, sometimes as winged sages carrying tools used in purification rituals. What makes them so fascinating is how the ancient texts describe their contact with humanity. The Apkallu did not rule. They did not conquer. They instructed. In the early city of Eridu, considered the first city in Sumer, Wana, the first Apkallu is said to have taught humans the foundational skills needed to build a functioning society. This doesn't appear in a mythological vacuum. It appears in administrative and king list tablets, the same kinds of records used for political history. If you enjoy structured explanations like this, consider subscribing. It helps us continue exploring the oldest accounts in a clear and accessible way. Over time, the Apkallu's image evolves, especially during the Neo-Assyrian period. Statues of fish-cloaked sages were buried under palace foundations and gates, intended to protect structures from misfortune, disease, or spiritual danger. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of these figures, each placed carefully in ritual positions. This shows that the Apkallu weren't treated as abstract mythical monsters. They were considered guardians, beings whose presence offered protection and order. Another important aspect is their relationship with kingship. In the Sumerian worldview, the legitimacy of early kings was tied not just to the gods, but to knowledge granted by the Apkallu. A king who had the guidance of a sage was considered wiser, more capable, and better connected to the divine world. Some clay tablets even claim that certain kings received direct instruction from these beings, similar to how later civilizations described prophets or legendary advisors. But there's a shift in the narrative after the flood. Mesopotamian tradition divides history into two phases: before the flood and after the flood. Before the flood, the Apkallu were divine. Their wisdom was flawless. Their guidance shaped the earliest cities. After the flood, however, things change. New beings appear, not divine Apkallu, but human sages said to be trained by the originals. These later sages were wise, but they were not immortal. They didn't come from the deep waters. They didn't carry the same authority. This raises a major question. Why does Mesopotamian mythology separate the sages into pre-flood and post-flood groups? One explanation suggests that the Sumerians saw the flood as a reset, not only for humanity, but for the beings that guided humanity. Pre-flood Apkallu were described as perfect. Post-flood humans were not. Some versions even describe one Apkallu who caused trouble, refusing to follow the rules, acting independently, or influencing humans in ways the gods did not approve. This rebellious Apkallu becomes an explanation for why post-flood sages were human and not divine. This mixture of divine beings, flood resets, and knowledge transmission has led some researchers to speculate whether the Apkallu were originally based on real historical figures, such as exceptionally skilled priestly groups, whose abilities became exaggerated over generations. But others focus on the symbolic aspects. The fish symbolism suggests a connection to water, the source of life, fertility, and nourishment. The eagle-headed Apkal represents sky and oversight. Their wings indicate the ability to travel between realms. Their tools, often buckets and cones, are interpreted as instruments of purification or blessing. The imagery suggests that Apkallu were associated with renewal, cleansing, and protection. However, some ancient texts describe the Apkallu using unusual phrases. Those who descended from the deep, those born of the waters, those who appeared before kings existed. These descriptions imply a connection to pre-human or pre-civilizational beings, something that has fueled centuries of speculation. Apkallu reliefs were carved into palace walls at Nineveh, Nimrud, and Dur-Sharrukin. The Assyrians believed these figures were powerful guardians. They placed their statues beneath doorways, foundations, and corners. The placement was always intentional, aligned with entrances, thresholds, and vulnerable points. This suggests the Apkallu had a clear function in spiritual protection, similar to guardian spirits or protective angels in later traditions. What makes the Apkallu especially interesting is their link to the Anunnaki. While the two groups are distinct, their stories overlap through the figure of Enki. The Apkallu are described as emissaries or agents of Enki's wisdom, helping humanity survive, adapt, and learn. This places them within a larger framework of Mesopotamian cosmology, where divine beings interact with humans to establish civilization. As we move into later Babylonian myths, some Apkallu transform into monstrous beings, such as fishmen or hybrid guardians. This is particularly prominent in art rather than text. The artistic transition reflects fears and hopes of the time. When cities were stable, Apkallu were wise sages. When times were unstable, their imagery became more defensive and aggressive. This shift shows that the Apkallu weren't static figures. They adapted to the needs and concerns of each era. One of the most intriguing questions is how these stories influenced later cultures. Some scholars see connections between the Apkallu and the biblical Watchers, beings who descended to earth and taught forbidden knowledge. Others see similarities in Greece, Egypt, and even India, where hybrid sage-like beings appear near the foundations of civilization. Whether these parallels represent cultural diffusion, coincidence, or a shared ancient memory is still debated. But what we know for certain is that the Apkallu represent one of the earliest attempts to explain how humans transitioned from primitive life to organized society. The Sumerians didn't believe humans figured it out alone. They believed someone, or something, taught them. And these teachers were remembered not as gods, not as kings, but as hybrid beings of extraordinary wisdom, whose stories survived for thousands of years in the oldest written records ever discovered. If you know someone who would enjoy learning about ancient mythical creatures and their role in early civilizations, feel free to share this video. In the end, whether the Apkallu were symbolic, historical, or something more, they reveal how the first cities viewed their origins. Civilization was not an accident. It was guided, preserved, and protected by beings who stood between gods and men,